course, with my good friend, Jack Duffin. How are you, Jack?
I'm good. It's exciting times.
It certainly is. We're waiting. We're counting down for that exit poll. Let me know in the comments below when it's released, what your thoughts are. Going to be a big night. I was actually, for a long time, we've been looking at this exit poll, we've been waiting for it. And yeah, guys, the time is nearly upon us. So do quickly give this video a quick thumbs up, please. And Jack, I believe the time is upon us. The exit poll has just been released, and here we go. What have we got? The anticipation.
Refreshing and waiting. Labour are going to win is the headline, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone who's been following the election.
What have we got? Okay. So.
Wow.
Let's just check. Okay, we are looking at a huge, massive Labour majority. We're looking at 410 seats for Labour. But Jack?
The one that a lot of us are looking towards, Reform UK, 13 seats predicted. That is massive.
Now, I was in Clacton today. This is the front page of the Clacton Gazette. Labour heading for 170 seat majority. We thought something like that might happen. But who is going to be the opposition to that Labour government? And in Clacton, of course, an incredibly important vote, because that's where Nigel Farage is standing. And if this is right, Jack, let's assume that Nigel is going to win in Clacton and that he is going to be joined by a decent-sized group of Reform MPs, that Reform, despite being a new party, will have broken through that first past the post system. Jack, what do you think that means with Nigel if he is in the House of Commons with other Reform MPs?
Yeah, Nigel's got such a broad reputation. Everyone knows who he is. So it was never going to be that much of a surprise to see one seat won. And the fact that, hey, could they get 2? Could they get 3? If this is right and we're talking about 13 seats, 15 seats Salvation had earlier today, that is something where it's the breakthrough. It's the breakthrough that UKIP never had in the past. This broad appeal across the country is going to be pocketed. Going to see lots in Essex. Going to see some probably around Lincolnshire. But that's the point where we're going to see lots of seats where they're going to be really close. And this is that 5-year journey that Nigel's talking about.
Yeah, and this is extraordinary stuff, guys. Just to go through this. 410 seats for Labour. A huge majority. But who is going to be the opposition? Well, according to the exit poll, the Conservatives will be down to 131 seats. The Lib Dems, 61 seats. But Reform UK, 13 seats. Now, that is pretty extraordinary stuff. When you consider, not that long ago, people were questioning whether Reform would be able to win a single seat. And you have to assume, I think, Jack, I think it's fair to assume that if Reform are winning 13 seats, that does mean Nigel Farage, it seems, on course to winning Clacton. And that alone has an absolutely massive impact. And if Nigel is joined by a further dozen Reform MPs, it's hard to overstate, I think, how much this is going to change British politics, with Reform seeking to establish itself as the opposition to a Labour government.
He's like a fox in a hen house. As soon as he is there, it's going to cause carnage and upheaval. They've never really had it in Westminster. They do what they want, red or blue, very, very similar. Whereas this is dramatic change. Lots of the parties were thinking, hey, call the early election. Tories thought, hey, worst case scenario, it's just him in there by himself. But they have run such a bad campaign. The public is speaking. And who knows what this is going to mean for vote share. It's probably going to be really close. If we're talking about 13 seats here, and exit polls are not always exact. Yes, they're going to predict Labour to have a victory. It's going to be right. But this could be really close in vote share. And we've seen polls as little as today talking about maybe 60, 65 seats for the Conservative Party. So don't be surprised. This is a lot lower than the 130.
Yeah, please, guys, do whack this video a quick thumbs up. And Jack, I want to say to you, if we are looking at 13 Reform seats, where do you think they could be? Obviously Clacton is an obvious one. We know Richard Tye standing in Boston and Skegness. We know Lee Anderson standing, of course, in Ashfield. Any other seats you think particularly interesting, Jack, in terms of that reform breakthrough, if we do see it?
Yeah, so just looking at sort of the betting odds and for the most likely seats, Clacton was number 1, then Ashfield, then Boston and Skegness, Great Yarmouth, Basildon and Billericay. The Tory chairman could be coming 3rd, despite him deciding it was a safe seat for the Conservatives. South Basildon, East Thurrock, Castle Point, Thurrock, Louth and Horncastle, Barnsley North, South Holland and Deepings. They are the best seats according to the bookies as of this afternoon.
Yeah, if you're just tuning in, guys, because there's some people asking about seats, just to recap, the exit poll has come out, and what the exit poll is saying, and they're pretty, usually pretty spot on, is they're saying Labour with a huge majority, 410, Conservatives down to 131, the Lib Dems 61, but in an incredibly dramatic breakthrough, if this does play out, not only it seems Nigel Farage winning in Clacton according to the exit poll, I think, but a further 12. So in total, 13 Reform seats, 13 Reform MPs according to this exit poll. And I think this really does open us up to another question, Jack, which is, of course, if we were talking about vote share, if we were talking about a proportional representation system, just how different could that be? But that on its own, Jack, I think is a sensational, absolutely sensational result. And as I said, it'll be very interesting to see now how close Reform are to actually overtaking the Conservatives on national vote share.
Yeah, if you're talking about 17% of the vote with 650 seats, I think we're still at that number. I don't know if that drops slightly with the boundary review. It's 110 seats. So that is what proportional representation would mean. Obviously, Labour, they're not going to vote to bring this in. Why would they? They're in a really strong position, having the vast majority of the seats now. But it's one where there will be bigger pushes, maybe in 5 years' time when there's more of a hung parliament. The smaller parties could force that through and put that onto Labour and say, hey, we're not going to work with you unless this is a done deal. That could certainly be a case for the 2029 general election.
Yeah, guys, please do whack this video a quick thumbs up. We'd really appreciate it. But I just want to, I want to look ahead again. If this is correct, this means, and people are asking about vote share, the exit poll doesn't have anything about vote share, guys. It's only on seats. So that's what it's done. It's an estimate, basically, a pretty informed, usually a fairly spot on estimate that is put in Reform on 13 seats. And I repeat the point again, at the beginning of this campaign, many weren't even giving Reform a chance of winning 1 seat, let alone 13. What we have seen recently in the last few polls was Reform picking up support and being very close in terms of vote share with the Conservatives. So repeat the point, it will be very interesting now to see how this all plays out. And I will, of course, be bringing you all of the results in the morning, the key results in the morning as they play out over the next few hours. Jack, what do you think is going to be to come over the next few hours?
I think it's going to be one of the most fascinating election nights that we've seen in this country because it's not going to be uniform. You're going to see places where parties assume they were going to be doing well and then they've not done as well. And then there'll be other seats where you're like, oh, I thought that seat would go Labour, but that's held on. And it's a real mix. We've seen more and more from sites like Britain Elects talking about how the Labour voters are coming out and supporting Reform. It's not that age-old, oh, it's just Tories that are disgruntled. The support is coming from all over the place. And it's how many of these seats are set up to be in contention in 5 years' time. And Reform will kick on their ground game. And if they're winning 13 seats with no ground game, there's been ground game in Thurrock, in Clacton. There's probably not been too much outside of that. I know there's been quite a bit going on in Yarmouth, but to the level that you'd want for a full campaign, we're talking about a dramatic 5 years where they can build up, develop branches, win councillors. there can be a real push that it's the second party in British politics in 5 years' time. So Nigel's got a long road ahead of him, but that's one man I would never be betting against.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, guys, if you think about it, is the polling that recently came out from YouGov. In many ways, the Labour has been the protest vote for many. YouGov did some research that said overwhelmingly those voting Labour are doing so because they simply want to kick the Tories out, right? They're not doing it on the basis necessarily of policy. Well, very few are. And that sets up what Nigel Farage has spoken about, which is who is now going to be the main opposition to what looks almost certain now to be an incoming Keir-Starmer government. We saw Nigel Farage originally elected as one of only 3 MEPs for UKIP. You saw what he did there, built up the People's Army, and eventually we got Brexit. And that is now going to be the next big battle, I think, moving forward. You know, the Conservatives are likely to have a leadership race. Hard to see Rishi Sunak remaining as leader for much longer. I mean, it's been a catastrophic mistake to go early. What do you think of that decision now from Sunak to go early with the early election?
It was unbelievable. I could see the logic in going early, but to deliver the campaign they were, where they seem to have been more focused on gambling on the election date than actually delivering a campaign. There's been complaints from branches around the country that the literature just hasn't been good. There's been no imagination. But at the same time, you see several key figures in the party disgruntled, not happy, and that will lead in, and has been seen throughout. And it's coming on the back of a local election where lots of councillors lost their seats. They were deeply unhappy with the election being called and felt like, hey, if you'd have done this 4 weeks earlier, we'd have probably kept our council seats, and instead you threw us under the bus. So it's one where lots of people just didn't want to go out and campaign for him. And it felt quite often like scenes from the thick of it, where there was just gaff after gaff after gaff. And it almost felt like, was he actually trying to win? But you talk about the leadership election coming up for the Tories. Well, lots of these people are saying, yeah, I'm going to throw my hand
Who's going to be left?
They're not going to be they're not going to be MPs.
A lot of the people you may have expected to be go forward as in the next Tory leadership election may well lose their seats tonight, right?
Yep. Steve Baker, probably not. Generic, probably not. They're just not going to be MPs. So it's going to be fascinating to see what the makeup of what remains of the Tory party after tonight, because they're going to have a decision on their hands. And there might be a lot of unknown names that are trying to take a step forward.
Just reading some of your comments now, guys. Richard saying this is how you should speak on your videos. Oh, this is how I speak. But thank you. Katie, urging people to like the video. Appreciate that so much. KMG24 saying, hopefully my neighbouring Great Yarmouth will have voted Reform. Now, Yarmouth is an interesting one. Because we know Rupert Lowe, former Brexit MEP, as am I, former colleague of mine. He's been put in a very strong campaign in Great Yarmouth. And I think it's likely with 13 seats, if Reform do get 13 seats, you could see seats that haven't been talked about, haven't been discussed. It's hard to pick out exactly what seats at that level you're going to see Reform challenging in and going very close and winning.
Yeah, there's 4 that one's obviously a guarantee in Clacton. And then the other 3, Ashfield, Boston and Great Yarmouth, I feel really good on. Where the rest of those 9 come from could be anything. Basildon, Thurrock, sort of Castle Point. There'll be a strong contingent in Essex, but these could be anywhere, and you'll get random seats.
Just to say, Sparky Gaz has put this message, 13 seats isn't massive. Let's put this into perspective, right? UKIP, which had, at the time, national branch structure, councillors, had been operating for a long time, got close to 4 million votes in 2015 and got a single seat. It is incredibly difficult when you're a new party without the established infrastructure to break through under first past the post. If Reform has got 13, and Great Danton, they're saying 13 is massive. For Reform in its first general election to win 13 seats, I think the Greens, for instance, who have been around for donkey's years, I think they're on 2 in this project. So that puts them up 1. But 13 is beyond what anyone thought was likely at the start of this campaign. And I repeat the point, the prospect now of Nigel in Parliament with a group of Reform MPs looking to establish Reform as the main opposition to a Keir Starmer Labour government, that is huge for British politics moving forward.
We only have to look at the last general election. The Lib Dems got 11 seats, and they have a great structure across the country, really dedicated activists, and that's all they could manage in that time. And they're now projected over 60, and that's one where Reform have done all this in the space of like 4 weeks. And what can they do with 5 years? Nigel at the helm. Lots of donors are probably looking at the Tory party going, it's still rotten. I don't want to give my money to that. They haven't been giving their money to that during the campaign. And if some of them come behind Nigel, then that is another sort of part they can take forward and grow with this. So you can certainly be saying that the goal in 5 years' time, probably not going to form the government, but...
Well, you never know.
You could be the official opposition. And that is the point where you look at this in 5 years' time, Labour still first, Reform are the second biggest party in the UK, and then 5 years after that, you can talk about being the government.
I just want to clarify because, and see if there's any other information, Jack. But just to clarify, because there's some people asking, well, how do they know already? What this is a exit poll. So it's a calculation, it's put together by the data bods, and it's usually pretty accurate, right? No, we're not saying this is absolutely, of course, the confirmed result, because there's a lot of countings that go on all night long, and when the results are confirmed, I'll be bringing you the highlights in the morning. But what this is basically a projection based on research that's done, credible research that's done, that's usually pretty spot on. So this being the projection, it seems pretty certain that Reform is going to win. Yeah, and Tim there saying it's actually pretty spooky how spot on it normally is. But for this to say Reform's on 13 seats, I mean, it means there's going to be Reform MPs in Parliament, basically. It may not be exactly 13. It might not exactly be 61 Lib Dem. It might not exactly be 2 Green. But it gives you an indication, a flavour. And it's looking like a big Labour majority. It's looking like the Conservatives down to around 130 seats. And it's looking like Nigel Farage's Reform Party breaking into Parliament in a big way.
Yeah, I would say, looking at that, I say 8 to 20 seats. Something in that range is probably what you're looking at for Reform. But in the same way, you could look really wide for the Tories here, because there was talks of down to 60. That could all still be in play. You've got so many seats where you're talking about like a 1% prediction swinging seats between different people. And as much exit poll and stuff in the world, you just can't know that when it's that small. So it's going to be fascinating as these results start coming out.
Now that's interesting. Stephen asking the question, if Reform do get 13 seats, will this lead to Tory defections? Now just bear this in mind. I know we're looking a bit ahead. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, guys, because these numbers aren't confirmed. The results aren't in yet. But this is usually a pretty accurate indication of what is going to happen. The Conservatives now are going to have a leadership election, one presumes. Sunak's not going to stick around forever now. And as part of that leadership election in the Conservative Party now is going to be a huge debate about what on earth they now try and do in respect to Reform, in respect to, it seems, not confirmed, but it seems like Nigel Farage in Parliament with a group of Reform MPs. How do you think that could play out in the forthcoming Conservative leadership election?
Well, it's one of like, do they want to become blue Lib Dems or do they want to become Reform light? And the trouble is, if they want to go out and win votes, they probably need to challenge the Lib Dems, because if someone's looking at it, whoever that Tory leader is, and goes, I've got Nigel Farage or I've got this person that's promised us the world for 14 years, let us down, I don't trust them. So if anything, I could see the Tories continue to push more to the left. And that then opens up that discussion, as someone pointed out. Could you see more defections? Could you see some of the more sensible Tory MPs going, actually, this party's not for me. I don't want to go and serve under Tom Tugendhat. I don't want to go serve under someone that is very mellow and sort of sounds more like a Lib Dem.
Wet.
Yeah, a wet. I was trying to be polite.
Yeah. No, we don't bother about that. Do please whack the thumbs up button, guys. I'd really appreciate it. Ant saying, thanks for the super chat, Ant, saying I vote Reform but kept quiet. Could others? Well, yeah, Ant, absolutely right. I mean, this is something, and thanks for the super chat, mate. This is something people are now talking about, right? Something that maybe the polls did not pick up is a shy Reformer vote. Explain what's meant by that, Jack.
So we saw it in the referendum where people were saying, hey, they didn't want to openly admit what they were going to do, but they went out and happily did it. And we saw it with the Tories in previous general elections, where when someone calls them up and goes, hey, who are you voting for? They don't want to give that information up. And whereas someone that votes more left-wing, like, yeah, I'll tell everyone I vote left-wing. And that's the difference where the pollsters struggle to get it. But I think one part of data set that I really want to see next week as it starts coming out is people that didn't vote before that came out and said, actually, I did
Jason
it in the
there saying
referendum.
loads of shy reformers. Reading your comments, guys. Do keep them coming.
I voted in the referendum for the first time. I'm sick of red and blue. This was the first time I felt like, actually, I can go out and I can vote for someone that I believe in. Nigel's not going to let me down. And it's going to be fascinating once these numbers come out, because pollsters, Lord Ashcroft usually does quite a few of these polls.
Tim saying this coverage is excellent. Cheers, mate. If you are enjoying it, guys, do please whack the thumbs up button. We really appreciate it. Yeah, the shy reformer, this could be the story of the election, couldn't it?
Oh, it's 100% going to be the story of the election. So everyone knew Labour was going to win. Reform, no one, up until 48 hours ago, was talking about double-digit reform seats.
Yeah, and you know, in sort of the pollsters' defence, it's very hard, isn't it? Because the Brexit Party didn't stand down. Thanks, Tanya, for saying she's loving it. The Brexit Party not standing in Conservative-held seats at the last election, of course, gifted the Conservatives in many ways that big majority. And of course, they just didn't deliver. They didn't cut immigration, they increased it. They didn't cut taxes, they increased them. They didn't stop the boats. They just made a whole load of excuses. But what you're now seeing in terms of the surprise, by the way, Chrissy keeps asking, this is my mate Jack Duffin. Jack, introduce yourself.
Yeah,
for those that have just
I'm
joined.
Jack, a former Thurrock councillor. Been involved with UKIP back in the day, but very much I'm a data nerd, so I love all this stuff like the polling and everything like that.
Yeah, so what's hard, I think, for the pollsters to have picked up is because you didn't have the benchmark at the last general election of the Brexit Party standing. I think there's probably a lot of voters, and this is something that people haven't picked up really, but Nigel Farage has said it a lot. If reform weren't standing in this election, there's a lot of people who voted today, I think, for reform that wouldn't have voted at all. And I think it's that group of voters that perhaps led to some underestimating the level of support. Of course, we've got to see this all play out. But I was thinking before, I did say it to you earlier, didn't I, Jack? I think the phenomenon of the shy reformer, of reform support being underestimated, could be, the shocker that produces, we're looking like potentially over a dozen seats, a dozen reform MPs at this election. According to the exit poll, of course, we have to wait and see what actually happens.
But we could realistically be talking tomorrow about 100, 200 seats where reform is second. They become the opposition for people that want to vote Labour out in 5 years' time. But then you go into that local election, and from everything you've been told of, I'll vote reform, they never win, that suddenly changes in people's narratives. They go out and win a whole slate of councillors in a year's time, and suddenly the Tories are just getting wiped off the map, and people just get into the feeling of, you vote reform, you win, Nigel's suddenly the leader of that change, and if you don't want Labour in 5 years' time, you've only got one choice, and that is to vote for Nigel and vote for reform.
So loads of you saying in the comments below that you are backing reform, that you voted for reform. If you are enjoying this, please do whack the thumbs up button. It really does make a difference. Jack, if this does play out then, and you see this large Labour majority, you see the Conservatives reduced to 130 seats, you see this breakthrough for reform, what do you think the challenge is for reform between now and 2029? What do you think this battle is going to look like in terms of the dynamics now between a Labour government, Conservatives in opposition with far fewer MPs, and reform?
I think a lot of pressure is going to go into the next 10 months for them. You've got county council elections across pretty much the majority of England. And that's the point where they need to select candidates for everywhere. They need to go out and start campaigning. And this is what they've done with no ground game. And that is incredible. 13 seats with no ground game is unheard of in most modern elections, in first past the post especially. You can do it in sort of PR elections like you've had with the European elections. You can have an air war. But doing 13 seats in this format, phenomenal. Now they've got to back it up. So a lot of work's going to go in the next 10 months, and that's going to be the most fascinating thing. Can you change from this machine that they've got now, where air war has been phenomenal? The work that's gone into social media and everything has been unheard of in terms of sort of British elections. Now can they go and take that and win? And by all means, if you listen to this and think, hey, I want to help out, go and find out tomorrow about running in local elections, because that is what Nigel's going to need people to do so that everyone around the UK can vote reform in a year's time. And Wales as well, particularly been that place that they don't want to vote Labour. The Tories struggle at times. That is up in a year's time. So that is a place where they can take a serious foothold into the Welsh Parliament Assembly. I'm not quite sure what it's called these days, but that is another door in. So there is a lot of elections going on. They don't have to wait 5 years. It's about winning elections in the next 4 years to set up for a real breakthrough moment and becoming the official opposition in 2029.
Just to recap one more time, guys, the exit poll, if you haven't seen it, and it's usually pretty spot on. Obviously, it might not be absolutely perfect, but it gives you an idea of what you can expect to play out this general election. Labour with a big majority, 410 seats. The Conservatives down massively to 131. The Lib Dems on 61. But what well could be the real story of this election, 13 Reform MPs. I don't think there's much we can add at the moment, Jack. We're going to be up all night watching the results roll in. It's going to be fascinating, guys. In the morning, probably around 9 a.m, I will be putting up a video just highlighting what has happened overnight. So do get up, check out my channel, and I'll bring it all as to whether or not this plays out as the exit poll has projected or not. Anything else, Jack, before we sign off?
Just, it's going to be a crazy, crazy night, and this is the start of something special. And genuinely, whoever you support, it's fascinating to see British politics is on a knife edge, which seems weird to say with a party having over 400 MPs, but anything is in play now. So an exciting 10 months ahead.
Thanks so much for watching, guys. And as I said, I'll catch you in the morning. Cheers.